A lot can change in a week, can't it?
One day you're sort of the worst of adversaries, the next day you're best mates again.
You talking about the pod?
No, this is the FIFA, UEFA, inverted commas, civil war that is now not a civil war.
Embarrassing. One word for all of this.
Because a week ago when we were recording, it was all about that UEFA statement critical of personal political interest being pursued when Gianni Infantino was late for the FIFA Congress because he was in the Middle East with Donald Trump. That made all the headlines at the FIFA Congress in Paraguay. And then this week started the new statement.
Maybe there's something in the water about being back in Europe and being on solid ground. Maybe they thought the weather in Paraguay was too hot for them and their tempers got too hot, those people at UEFA, because that statement really was very different to the one issued in Paraguay hours after that walkout.
Talked about the strong and respectful relationship with FIFA, mutual trust, shared passion, the personal relationship between the presidents being very good, and how the recent episode was isolated and does not reflect our ongoing collaboration. And this episode has our ongoing collaboration.
No massive fallout yet. We've had our moments.
Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked with Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times, and myself, Rob Harris from Sky News. And very good to hear from a lot of our listeners out in Bilbao at the Europa League final. Generally, the stadium, to the UEFA hotel, to the airport, people saying they're listening.
Well, that's good to know. And it sounded like a very interesting final, lots of ways out, Rob. And a few things happened off the pitch as well.
Before we get into those, if those people who liked it and listened to it, if they want to subscribe and like, that would be really helpful to this pod. So come on, guys, if you're into this, please do that.
Share the word. It seems to be how many people are discovering about what's happening inside the likes of FIFA and UEFA. We'll get on to the implications of that Europa League final financially shortly for Manchester United, but something that might have been lost in all the football news this week. Before we go into our domination of FIFA, the Olympics in 2028, there'll be NFL players.
Yeah, flag football. I think we mentioned it briefly before. This is the sort of non-contact version of American football. The LA organisers are very keen to get this in. The IOC agreed to it, despite the fact most people in the street probably never heard of it.
Well, they would have heard of some of the star names, though, wouldn't they? Because they kind of have become celebrities outside of the US in the case of Travis Kelce, for who he's dating. This is Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City quarterback, his teammate there. He is dating who?
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, one of the most famous people in the world. And I guess that brings some of that star quality to the Olympics that the IOC seems to be wanting these days.
But only one player per NFL team will be allowed for each country, and they're going to have to go through some sort of qualifications or tryout to make the rosters.
So to be clear, Rob, you're saying that each country can only have one of these NFL players in their lineups. But it seems to me like most of the players in the NFL are from the United States of America. You do have the odd person from overseas. Most countries won't be able to field an NFL player, I would have thought.
It's one player per team on a national squad. So you can't take an entire lineup from the Patriots.
Right, well done in remembering an NFL team. So we'll be getting that. Okay, so now we got that clear. So one player from the Patriots, one from Kansas City, one from the Jets, etc., etc. But it will be interesting to see how many foreign lineups can field an NFL player.
Yes. However, if it's only one per team, then that means you can't have Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. So that's a tricky one.
They're both going to be pretty old by that time. I think we might have neither of those guys, if I'm honest.
And there are 10 players per team. It's a 5-on-5 format, and there are 6 men's teams, 6 women's teams. And this is a non-contact version of NFL for those unfamiliar with flag football.
Can we just apologise to regular viewers and listeners or people who follow the NFL for our complete stupidity when it comes to the NFL? But this pod is is for everyone, and we've got into a subject that we clearly don't know that much about.
Talking about maybe limited knowledge of the NFL and expected references to the NFL, the FA Cup final in England on Saturday when Crystal Palace beat Manchester City, in the final moments before full time, the BBC commentator talked about it being the year of the Eagles because the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl. And this was the Eagles of Crystal Palace winning the FA Cup, which I think was the first time I've heard a US sports reference inserted into British football.
No, so maybe Croydon will now be twinned with Philadelphia. Let's see if those areas are going to be twinned thanks to these successes.
Well, no tickets on sale yet for the Olympics, but we've talked a bit about how ticketing might work for FIFA at the Club World Cup and the main World Cup next year. And now we discover they're going to use dynamic pricing for the World Cup.
Yeah, senior people within the organisation of next year's World Cup confirmed that that is the model they're going to use. Not necessarily an algorithm, but yeah, it is this thing where prices can go up and down depending on supply and demand.
Always good at senior people, not some very junior individuals.
Yes. Well, let's see if this happens. I was thinking about this after the person said this, and again, it feels like fans who really follow their teams in numbers are going to suffer as a result of this. I'm thinking, look at all those Argentina fans who often mortgage their houses, sell their cars, sleep on the streets to follow their teams. Now, if their games are going to be the ones that are most in demand, and it's this dynamic pricing, people who are most loyal to their teams are going to have to fork out the most money. It doesn't feel very fair. So if people at FIFA are listening and are aware of this might be something they want to consider. It'd be terrible public relations again for FIFA.
I saw the other world version of dynamic pricing when going to Bilbao for that Europa final, which is the people paying a lot for those airline tickets that had gone up because there was such demand for an all-English final. In reverse, ticket prices would go down if it was a quieter time of year. So I suppose the thing for the World Cup is there are 104 matches. They set a certain price point, but it could be pretty challenging to fill some of those stadiums, so they can reduce the prices far lower if they know those stadiums are empty. And the fans know, look, there's dynamic pricing, there's a risk. If you buy early, you're guaranteed your ticket. If you leave it late, you might not get one, but also the prices might come down.
Yeah, but again, that's treating the World Cup as in a way that if you follow football in a way that you are following your country or a traditional football fan, these are not 104 Super Bowls as Gianni Infantino has described them. These games are not all going to be the same.
104 music acts, that's going to be quite intensive for the entertainment department of FIFA.
I'm going to be hoarse by the end of it. These games, if you follow teams that are, and they're popular because you follow them and you support them, it just doesn't sit right. Maybe that, these countries with mass followings, the public have to pay more, and profiteering as a result of people's love for their team doesn't quite feel right. If you're FIFA, the global governing body of football, which is, let's remember, is a non-profit organization, it makes huge amounts of money from the World Cup anyway, from the television sales, and that money is distributed to national FAs to grow the game. It really doesn't need to maximize these ticket pricing in a way that like a private entity would.
Just to make it clear, this wouldn't involve tickets that are given to countries as their national allocation. So a country might get, say, 5,000 tickets for each match, which goes to the official supporters club. That wouldn't be affected. This is the general public sales. And this sort of flexible dynamic model has been used for the Club World Cup, which starts next month. And actually, because the tickets haven't been in demand for many of the games, prices have dropped there. I think, obviously, for the World Cup itself, that is unlikely to happen. And prices will go up and up and up. And just to illustrate the Super Bowl reference, which uses dynamic pricing, the average price of a ticket for this year's Super Bowl was $6,900.
Blimey.
Is that really going to be the average for the World Cup final? Because if it is, that is a PR challenge for FIFA.
Because in the past episode, we tried to look at Super Bowl prices and we discovered the challenge in doing so because they're moving around. There isn't a set price list, as we've seen with UEFA for the finals at the moment, the Champions League and all the others. You know exactly the price points.
Yeah, there's also this cultural issue with the US public seemingly accepting this kind of hyper-capitalist approach to ticketing. That's what they are used to, paying, through the nose for tickets, whether it's music or sports. But in a lot of the rest of the world, it doesn't quite work like that. And there is shock, and there will be anger and surprise should these match tickets be priced at levels that are out of reach for ordinary people.
But overall, it is that challenge trying to fill some of these stadiums. And when we were at the World Athletics Championships 2019 in Qatar, there were empty stadiums, and then they were giving tickets away to some of the migrant worker population. And there was all sorts of questions then about the value of those tickets. But if you go in with a sort of dynamic pricing, then it does make it easier to ultimately just give them away. Maybe they'll need to start giving food and drink away with some of these tickets as well, particularly for the Club World Cup, to attempt to fill some of the stadiums, because we've had no details at all on ticket sales.
Well, they're not very good. Again, from backstage, they're not very good, and they were never going to be very good, because despite FIFA and Gianni Infantino's insistence, these are the best teams in the world. No disrespect to those who are there; they're quite clearly not all the best teams in the world. And some of the venues and arenas are enormous, so they're struggling to sell the tickets. Also, add in the fact that the interest in the competition from a broadcaster perspective isn't great, because it's on DAZN, which is sub-licensing it away. Normally, what you have is the broadcaster being able to act as the hype person for the event, but we're not seeing much of that yet. There is a sub-licensing agreement, I think, in the US with TNT, which is a big broadcaster that has the NBA basketball, so you might see some of that, but there's a lot of problems.
So you're saying not the 32 best teams in the world? Well, there won't be the reigning Spanish champions, Barcelona. There won't be the reigning English champions, Liverpool, at the Club World Cup, because obviously it's based on not only the coefficient, but the 4 recent Champions League winners up to 2024. Certainly, one of the biggest clubs in the world won't be there as well. Manchester United, nowhere near the Club World Cup, and even more challenging to attempt to qualify for it the next time around, because they won't be in Europe at all next season. Obviously, they'll try and qualify for the Champions League through the league next season, but currently, as we head into this final weekend of the Premier League season, in 16th place, things pretty miserable, losing that Europa League final to Tottenham Hotspur in Bilbao, and a game with so many financial consequences beyond the silverware.
Yeah, the figures are pretty worrying for Manchester United financially. So it's the first time in 10 years they won't have been in Europe next season. So that basically would have guaranteed them 30 million or so in the Europa League, or 70 million in the Champions League. Also, for the first time, they get hit with a 10 million pound penalty clause from Adidas for not being in the Champions League. That's the first time that's been imposed. Their lowly finish in the Premier League means £22 million less in merit money from the Premier League compared to last season. And also, no European football means probably 5 fewer matches at Old Trafford. And that equates to another £20 million. So actually, suddenly you're looking at this huge cash shortfall at a time when I guess they're desperate to reinforce the club.
I suppose that those are going to be some big lost earnings there in terms of savings, a little bit maybe from wages, I suppose.
No barbecue celebration.
No barbecue celebration, which was going to be the plan, a low-key barbecue, not a open-top bus tour if Manchester United had won that. What I must say, I know we don't talk about sport that much, might be one of the worst finals I've seen in a very long time. Unless you're a Tottenham fan, that was a very, very hard watch. Very bad football. Anyway, the fact is that United also have to try and build a squad. That's going to be really hard under these constraints. The transfer market's going to be tricky. And
offloading big earning players as well.
Correct. Offloading these guys. And also, guys, is there a PSR scenario the club is facing at all, or are they in good shape for that?
Well, Jim Ratcliffe had actually said to the fans groups in a letter just before Christmas that they'd lost 300 million over the past 3 years, and there was a danger of not complying with CSR. I think that was a justification for the sort of cuts. But I mean, I think they would have been absolutely desperately hoping that they were going to win the Europa League final, qualify for the Champions League. And now they're going to have to, I mean, not just tighten their belts, sort of squeeze it, really.
And the question raised is whether it's not the playing staff that suffers overall, but some of the lower paid workers within Manchester United with so many cuts across the club. And they've already cut hundreds of jobs, whether more job cuts could be coming. These aren't the players on big money. These are the rank and file staff that keep the club operating.
Yeah, they've laid off hundreds of staff to cut some of these costs. But these are low-paid employees on the whole, people who are desperate, really, for the jobs in the current UK job market as well. But Jim Ratcliffe has been cutting everywhere he can. I don't know how much more they can cut, Rob.
I've got to say that a lot of the fan chants, though, were still aimed at the Glazers out in Bilbao, where I was in the Old Town Square. Something that is disturbing, and I've heard it before when around groups of Manchester United fans, is they are chanting very often about wanting one of the Glazer family to die. And these are chants being sung in big open places, very intimidatory. They're talking about, quite frankly, methods of death as well, which seems absolutely horrific and isn't widely condemned at all. I think it goes far beyond just standard football fandom chants.
Yeah, it's the environment in which we're living now, where these chants and behaviour is more violent, more extreme than it is, and we've done plenty of episodes on social media as well. But yeah, it's grim, isn't it? Despite obviously they're unpopular, but it goes back a really long way. Wasn't the father, the now late Malcolm Glazer, hanged in effigy almost immediately after the takeover? So this kind of deep animosity and language and I guess the chants you mentioned, they date back quite a long way.
Yeah, it does. I think also interesting about this is the Jim Ratcliffe Ineos, the effect they've had, because they've now been running the operations at Man United for more than a year, and it couldn't really have gone worse, could it? I was just thinking, Diane Ashworth coming as technical director and then almost immediately being fired, or quite indicative of there's a big problem at the club, and it's the Ratcliffes have contributed to that rather than made it better, in my opinion.
Massively contributed. They've been running this whole clown show. Let's be very clear here. Dan Ashworth spent more time on gardening leave than he actually spent at Manchester United. His arrival cost them millions. His departure has cost them millions. Now, when we're talking about people being made unemployed, those cuts of low-paid workers, I wonder, how many of those add up to one Dan Ashworth? So, it is a remarkable feat of poor management so far from this Ratcliffe operation at Manchester United. And it will be interesting to see what they're actually good at. Yes, this man has made a lot of money in other industries, petrochemicals and the like, but he's shown no class as an operator in football. The idea that billionaires can walk into football and because this guy's really rich, he's a good businessman who'll know how to operate in football. So far, we've seen no sign of this at all.
Strong words, Tariq. Strong.
And obviously, Ruben Amorim was the first big appointment for Ineos after deciding to stick with Erik ten Hag after winning the FA Cup last season, then getting rid of him in October, bringing Amorim in at a cost of, around £15 million. So it would be reflecting on the leadership if they were to replace him. And obviously, Dan Ashworth maybe already paid the price for some of that dithering last summer with keeping Ten Hag.
Yeah, look, even on Amorim as well, like better football experts than us three, and there are plenty who cover the football in a more granular technical way. It will tell you that Ruben Amorim plays a certain style of football and requires a certain group of players. If this Ruben Amorim style is going to be embedded in Man United, they're going to have to replace this huge number of players in this squad. that's going to come at a cost. So I wonder if all of this was thought through.
Well, we focused on the losers. What about the winners? Because Tottenham Hotspur having their worst Premier League season, going into the final round of matches one place above the relegation zone, but then ending up in the Champions League with obviously some suddenly questioning should there be that promotion from the Europa League to the Champions League, but it gave this extra sort of twist, extra edge and excitement to the Europa League final, it seemed to. The fact a Champions League place was at stake for both clubs, and it can change the financial trajectory in the sort of upcoming years from just winning that match from a single goal.
Yeah, I think I mean, look, I've seen people saying, "Oh, it's crazy that 16th and 17th position people get into the Champions League this route." I actually think it's really important for the Europa League that this reward remains whoever is going for it, because it does add a lot of extra interest to the competition. And if the worst thing would be to get rid of it and then make it very much a sort of secondary thing. I think. And I don't think there's any prospect of that changing. And it's just the anomaly that the two of the worst non-relegated clubs in the Premier League happen to get there.
And there will be a record number of English teams in the Champions League, 6. Dates back really to 2012 when Chelsea won the Champions League. Tottenham finished 4th, but then were knocked out of contention for the Champions League the following season because there was only a maximum of 4 places, and meant Tottenham missed out.
Yeah, well, just on the finances, conversely, Tottenham, this incredible stadium that they've built at huge cost, one of the best in the world, certainly for me, the best in the Premier League now, is going to host Champions League football. They're going to get the huge gates at each of those group games. This is now the enlarged Champions League, so they're going to play, is it 6 or 8 group games?
4 home games, 4 away games.
4 away games. So 4 home games in that stadium, which is going to draw all that revenue, all the TV money. And you talk about changing the trajectory. For Spurs, this is massive. This could just suddenly change the direction that club was heading in. They're going to have a busy summer, one that's different to the one they expected thanks to this. This could set Tottenham up for years to come in a different way.
Well, busy summer at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium because Beyonce is playing. She's chosen the Tottenham Stadium over other places, which is lucrative income as well for the club. Sometimes Daniel Levy being criticised for seemingly focusing on the stadium and bringing in those sort of non-footballing activities, but they're all integral to the overall business. But suddenly now being able to bank on the Champions League money coming in while they've still got the stadium debt to pay off as well. They've been in the stadium now 6 years.
It's had Champions League football, I take it already. So that they're used to that there. Those big nights there at the Tottenham Stadium in North London. I think you can add about 100 million with the gate receipts and the TV to Tottenham's bottom line next season. That's really significant.
Take you back a few minutes. You talk about Manchester United being a clown show. One of the striking things that happened in Bilbao was actually the pre-match press conference involving Ange Postecoglou, the Tottenham manager, when he was asked a question by journalists from the London Standard, as it's now known. And it did show that he engages with media content, or he's certainly shown what's written about him, because he took umbrage at a reference to him teetering on being a hero or a clown, depending on the final. And he came with a great soundbite about not being a clown.
Well, I guess he had the last laugh there with that one.
Took me back to 2017, and I think maybe the only prescient piece that I might have ever written, which was at the FIFA Confederations Cup, which, of course, has now effectively been replaced by the Club World Cup. And I was in Sochi ahead of Australia's Confederations Cup match against Germany, and Postecoglou was Australia manager. I was there largely reporting on World Cup build-up for Russia. This wasn't going to be the game that was going to capture that much attention around the world because it was just Confederations Cup. And so I was just really largely observing this press conference, and he was starting to get quite tetchy with the Australian journalist. So I asked him why he was sort of so on edge ahead of what was, a competitive tournament, but not the World Cup. And I wrote at the time for AP that being cranky and prickly seemed to be a badge of honour for him. And he responded when I'd asked him about this, maybe that's just my demeanour.
Well, yeah, you got him up close. And has he changed much since then, Rob? Is he similar? You've obviously from 2017, which is nearly 9 years ago now. What does he could have looked like now? What's he sound like? Same guy?
Well, that's become one of the themes of his Tottenham reign, really. These prickly outbursts that are entertaining, but certainly willing to take on the media. But it was interesting we got that insight from him at a Confed Cup presser.
If we're going to talk about prescience, just one throwaway line. I got a text from a Manchester United friend during the game there, during the first half, and it was terrible. I texted him, this game is so bad, some sort of joke of a goal is going to be what determines the winner. 4 minutes later, a comedy goal, comedy error, and there you are. The worst Europa League final decided by, was it an own goal, or how would you describe that, Rob?
Bundled in by Brennan Johnson, not given as a Luke Shaw own goal.
There you go.
Yeah. More nostalgia to come, by the way, later in this pod. Far weightier matters than a Confed Cup presser. But Tariq, you're out in Brazil for us.
Yeah, well, maybe not for us. I'm here for me.
This isn't getting more restaurant tips after the popular curry suggestion from the other week from Brazil.
From Belo Horizonte. I could say I haven't had a curry in Sao Paulo just yet. I've got another day to go, so maybe you can squeeze one in. But there's some really interesting and kind of very important football news happening here right now. It is the election for the Brazilian Football Federation, the CBF. Don't forget, Brazil has won the World Cup more times than any other, 5 times champions. But the federation has been in various degrees of crises since 2015. And we'll come back to that soon as well, since the FIFA crisis. Last week, we mentioned that the president, Reginaldo Rodrigues, had finally been forced out. He'd been teetering. This one over allegations of a forged signature. And now, with the election coming this Sunday, there's only one candidate, a guy called Samir Shod from Roraima, a place that most people listening around the world would never have heard of. Most people in Brazil would never have visited. This is a place that borders Venezuela and Guyana in the far north of Brazil. But this guy somehow has managed to get 25 of the 27 state federations to support him in 10 teams. But what's caused a massive backlash is that 30 teams, almost all of the teams in the first division and 10 in the second division, were backing another guy, Reinaldo Bastos. But because the state federations have so much power, their candidate is not even on the list. So this one guy, so 21 clubs will be boycotting the elections on Sunday. And it again shows the dysfunction in global football and how things need to change.
And remember, this is a country hosting the Women's World Cup in 2 years.
Yeah, so the World Cup, Women's World Cup in 2027 here in Brazil. The clubs are saying, and players as well, Cafu, Dunga, top Rivaldo, top stars have also written to FIFA and said, look, this needs to change. Brazil is football as far as they're concerned, and this is really, really embarrassing. What's happened here is that these state federations, are 27 of them, each of their votes carries a weight of 3. The top division clubs have a weight of 2, and the second division clubs have a weight of 1 in any election. So they really are so unbalanced that they don't have a proper say in what's going to happen. And it reminds me of what's happening in Europe and around the world. We've talked about cases brought by FIFA Pro and the leagues in Europe about stakeholder access. And this is the same in Brazil, this kind of old-fashioned system where, as they call them here, the old cartolas or the top hats from state football decide what's happening in this modern game. And it's time for a change.
Yeah, fascinatingly crazy and worrying if you're, I guess, a Brazilian football fan. But just to say, I've been to Roraima, Boa Vista. I was there in 1986.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Zeke, tell us about Roraima.
Went across the border from Guyana to Boa Vista. There we go.
This is another pod episode. Ziegs goes to Guyana. I think we need an hour on
30 minutes our lot today. As ever, you can message us on all the social platforms at Sport Unlocked or sportunlockpod@gmail.com. Remember, if you rate and review us. It's always great to help spread the word. And if you hit subscribe, we land in your feeds automatically. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.